computer here. Just got into the room. So just bear with me just a moment while I get one thing set up here. Okay, there we go. All right. And I know some of the folks who are on the Zoom call here are have been in the course before. So glad to see you if I'm seeing you for the first time. And if I haven't seen you before or you're new to the training, then it's nice to meet you. And let's just see here. Just give me this one moment here. Okay. We should be good to go. One set up here. Hopefully record number 2. Okay. A second. With give me one moment here. Okay. There we go. All right. I appreciate your patience while I got this started here. Okay. I think hold on, let me just share my screen. There we go. Okay, thank you again for your patience. You should be able to see the presentation right now. If I can just get a thumbs up from folks.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, fantastic. All right, super. So, so as Dan mentioned, and I want to thank you very much for that kind introduction, Dan. I've been a practicing project manager for close to 30 years, been in emergency management for about 20 years, and have a book coming out in early April on the topic. So I'm excited to present some of the key findings, from my experience and from what I have done in terms of research and interviews with folks who are in the profession, so to speak. Wait a minute, I realize I have the wrong presentation, so I apologize. Let me rectify that. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to cover some common pitfalls on emergency management projects, and I want to get started with an exercise. And so this is not just going to be you listening, but I want you as teams basically coming together to work through how to resolve a scenario that I'm going to give you. So without further ado, We're going to begin with this opening exercise, which is called What's the Plan? So our learning objective is to identify gaps in the planning process and outcomes and planning challenges that you may have experience in planning projects for emergency preparedness and response, things of that sort. So let me give you the scenario. And as I said, I'm going to have you break up into teams. I see, Dan, just a question for you, Dan, are you going to participate as part of the teams, or are you going to help facilitate? Which role would you prefer to take on here?
I can help facilitate.
Oh, okay, fantastic. All right. So I see that we've got about 7 folks who are in the cohort here. So why don't I do this? I'll break you up into 2 teams, one team of 3, one team of 4. And what I'm going to do is you can read through the scenario that's here. I'm going to provide you with a set of schematics for school. So and so I'm going to drop that in the chat. You should be able to let's see here. Screenshot. I'm going to drop a file in here. Just give me a moment. Okay. And you should see a PDF. It's about, I want to say 6 pages long, or 6 pages altogether. It is the blueprints for school. So here's the scenario. Your team works for the emergency management agency in the fictional town of Liberty City. So for those who are who are probably familiar with some of the FEMA exercises, you probably, I think it's Liberty County, if I remember correctly, that's used commonly in their scenarios. So I have borrowed from that. Liberty City, for your information, is a let's say medium-sized city in the United States, about 300,000 residents altogether, and it's located on the U.S. Southeast coast. Your community has been impacted by a disaster, and your team has been tasked with setting up and staffing an emergency shelter. There are approximately 1,000 residents who require emergency sheltering, who cannot get back to their homes. And your team has been posted to the school, which has been designated as an emergency shelter. But the resources available and the plan that's used is unclear. Now, some of you may have some experience with emergency sheltering. That's great. If you're bringing that to the table, then fantastic. And if there are things that you're not sure about, that's fine too. So, but I want you to leverage what you know and understand about your practice and looking at this. And I know that in the time frame that we have, you're not going to be able to get to everything, but just focus on what's sort of immediate and important in terms of planning considerations. I realize you're not going to be able to develop a full-fledged plan, but that's sort of what we're looking at. Okay, so another person is on a Microsoft meeting simultaneously. So I just have to level with folks. If you're participating in this, it's great. If you're just observing, I guess, it's kind of hard to do both. So if you could pay attention to what's going on here, I'm going to put you in the team anyway. So if you can listen to the discussion, Dan, so since we're down 2 folks out of the 7, I'm going to put everyone in the same group, so to speak. All right. So we'll just do it that way.
Yeah, that's fine. You just have them be able to come off mute, and if they can put their cameras on.
I would like folks to participate as opposed to just observing what's going on. So I appreciate the interest in sort of multitasking. It's a little bit challenging here. All right, so let me give you a little bit more background on this. So your goal is to develop and set up an emergency shelter and to create, let's say, at least a plan and planning considerations, as much as you can do here. So use your collective experience and work within the constraints that you're given here. Okay. As we often say in drills and exercises, don't fight the exercise. Just go with it. If you do have questions, then let me know. I will answer them as best I can without sort of leading you along a path. Develop your planning strategy. So again, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged plan. I realize in a matter of 30 minutes, or so to speak, you're not going to be able to develop everything. And I want you to brainstorm what is needed for the shelter. So I'm sure being in this practice, you're not unfamiliar with some of the issues. So bring those to the table. And then what I want you to aim towards as far as a work product from your team is a 3-minute presentation to explain your plan and the planning process that you use to get there. Okay. So those are the elements. So at the end of this 30 minutes, you'll have that presentation focusing on, what that plan is constituted of, and then what that process was in developing that plan. So your team has 30 minutes. I'm going to check in with you. Dan will check in with you as you sort of go through this. Okay. So if you have questions, we're happy to answer them as we can. Again, without giving away too much. So I'm going to stop there. And before I create breakout rooms, are there any questions that you may have for myself? You can take yourself off mute. You can put it in chat, whatever you prefer. Michael, I saw yourself. You're off camera. It's good to see you again. Any questions that you have?
Nope, I'm ready to go.
Nope. I see folks shaking their heads. No, they're ready to go. That sounds fantastic. So let me just see here. Hold on. I have this covering. Let's see. Dan, I don't see where the breakout rooms are. Are you able to create breakout rooms, Dan? Dan?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't see that on the bottom of my screen either. I'm not sure.
You know what? It may not be available with the version that you have. No big deal. No problem. The cohort that's here, you're going to work as a team. I will be here and Dan will be here observing. So I would encourage you now to take yourselves off camera. And if you want to leave yourselves off camera, that is fine. In fact, I would prefer it so I can actually see you face to face. So if there are no questions, please go ahead. It's now 11:16 Eastern time, and you have a half an hour. You can use all the half an hour to plan, present as you wish, okay, or to create your presentation as you wish. So if you could start by introducing yourselves, whatever you want to, however you want to begin.
I guess I'll go first. I'm Michael Dreamer. I am starting my own disaster planning consultant company in Oklahoma. 8 years, almost 8 years public health experience, was director of emergency preparedness and response for the state health department in Oklahoma. Worked at a university for about a year, some volunteer firefighting experience and things like that. So.
Morning, my name's Art Ditzel. I'm a emergency manager for the New York Presbyterian Healthcare System. I've been in healthcare about 30 years.
Hi, Tom Hutnier from the Metro Boston area. I too have a background in public health preparedness, and I'm working outside the field right now in some security work.
So don't be shy. If you're if you're able to, I know there are a couple of folks who are on the call here, Barb, and I believe Mark had indicated that they might not be able to share or at least participate fully. Latasha, unless I have the name incorrect here, are you able to take yourself off camera or at least off mute to be able to introduce yourself? I see Mark already introduced himself via chat, so thank you, Mark. So at this point, Dan and I will just observe, and we'll let the group here work the problem. All right, and again, we're here to assist as necessary, like pretend we're the EOC, and in some instances, the EOC may or may not be so helpful, but we'll do our best, not to be obstructionist, but to be constructive on what we can do to support. So I'm going to put myself on mute, and I'll let the team work.
So before you put yourself on mute, I got a couple questions.
Please go ahead. Shoot.
I'm looking at the schematics of your school. I assume we have full run of the school. The school's not going to be in session, so we'll be able to shelter in classrooms.
That's correct.
The auditorium, is it preset with chairs or is it an open space?
It's preset with chairs. The chairs are fixed. Good question. All the other rooms that are there, I assume they're classrooms, except for the office, which, just imagine it's a regular school, administrative office. And the basement, you'll see that there's a boiler room that's there. You go into a basement of a school building and you'll get an idea. It's typical sort of setup. There's a lot of heating, ventilation, storage down there.
Yeah, so the basement's out of play for sheltering. I see Mark asked, do we have power and telephone?
Yep. Assume that power is available. It's not going to be interrupted, and your communications will be uninterrupted.
ADA access to the school?
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Is there an answer to it?
Well, so I have been to the school. I can tell you that it does have a ramp, but it is not in the front of the building. It's in the back of the building.
Okay, and I don't see elevators on the schematics.
There's no elevators. It's an old school. It's over 100 years old.
Is there any more property outside the building that we have access to?
Could you repeat that? I didn't quite hear you clearly, Tom. I apologize.
Does the school have a playground or a parking lot or any other?
Yeah, there's a blacktop sort of basketball court towards the back of the building. So if you're looking at the schematic, if you look, I think it's, as I remember it, the bottom is the sort of front entrance in the first floor. So at the back end, which would be the top of that schematic, there would be a fenced in basketball court that's there, and maybe like a playground nearby.
I don't know how everybody else in the room feels about it, but just looking at these plans and some, initial thoughts, we could do special medical needs sheltering or ADA compliant sheltering on the first floor and the boys and girls gyms. And we can separate those out by gender. We can work out from there to the rest of the classrooms, family shelters and some, men's shelters, women's shelters, and others, shelters for folks who bring their service animals with them, whether it's a service dog or a service pony. I believe Mark asked about in the chat. Anybody think of any other needs we need? We should probably leave the cafeteria open to feed those who are housed there rather than housing people in the cafeteria.
I was thinking probably using the 5th or 6th floor or fourth or fifth floors for like command center, office space for the people that are working there to keep them up top, away from everything else.
Yeah, you got a couple of big rooms there. What is that? 408 or 508, 408, 506, 406.
Mm-hmm.
They're right off the stairwells. Looks like there's easy access up and down from there.
Yeah.
Barb asked about security. I would assume we'd be working with local law enforcement for security.
That's correct. So assume that there's school safety and PD available to you.
I would say probably using the third floor for overflow. If we exceed what we're anticipating, we can handle additional people up on one of those floors.
If we're talking 1,000 folks, I think we're easily going to roll
Yeah.
into to 4 and 5. What is the? I see there's a scale in feet here. And forgive me, I can't remember the answer to this question. Isn't there a square footage per person we need for sheltering?
Yes. So the Red Cross, so as the role of the EOC, the Red Cross prescribes at least 21 square feet, sort of 3 by 7 or whatever configuration for the average person. For special medical needs individuals, it's actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and perhaps somebody, it's been a little while, but it was 100 square feet, which is a lot.
10 by 10 box.
10 by 10. That's a lot, because you have to provide space for any assistive mobility devices, wheelchair, walker, what have you, and also a service animal or a service animal or a service animal. So those are a lot to consideration. Plus durable medical equipment, anything of that sort. At least that was, as I recall, in the functional needs, the FNSS kinds of functional needs and services. I'm sorry, the actual translation of the acronym, but it was what was put together by FEMA and I think the Red Cross and some other groups going back, I think, about 12 or so years ago. But that was roughly what they had prescribed. I don't know if it's been updated.
Access and functional needs, yeah. That's...
Right.
So just doing some fuzzy math off the top of my head, we're going to need most of the building for 1,000 people.
Yeah. The public health side of me is thinking a quarantine room. We have a lot of ongoing measles outbreaks in the country, and we can pass COVID. I don't need to talk about COVID ever again, but yeah, like measles and things like that. If you got to kick someone, we need to rapidly quarantine until we can do something else. That would be probably a good idea.
Yeah, we could use some of those the classrooms at the top, the 520, 511, 4001 kind of rooms. They're off the stairwell. There's a bathroom right there in most cases. Yep, mark no elevators. Barb, if we need to transport people to definitive care, possible helo landing zone is the you mentioned there was blacktop outside, Andrew. Do we have enough space to drop a helicopter there?
And also have to think that we need to think.
So the in communication with the folks from the Department of Transportation for Liberty City, they do not approve of any helicopters landing in that area. They can land actually at there is a hospital helipad that they can land at, but there's no one close to that area. The closest would be the Liberty City airport, which is about 10 miles away.
How many showers are we talking are in the facility now?
So it's a standard school configuration. It's about there's showers for the boys and girls gym that's designated, and I'm sorry if I'm using antiquated terms, but those are what's on the schematics that's there. So yeah, it's it's probably, we're talking about 10 to 15 showers at most per side.
First side. All right.
And there's no there's no specifically designated family restroom or something like that. They're again segregated as they're indicated on the schematics.
Probably need to think about bringing in portable facilities. It's a 100-year-old building with probably aging infrastructure, and you just dumped 1,000 people in there 24/7 for how long something's going to back up or get destroyed or something, and you're going to have to transition to something else. So I would think about having a backup plan for portable showers, portable restrooms, everything that we could put maybe right outside, because that's not going to withstand that kind of usage factor.
Yeah, if we flush all the toilets at once, the building's probably going to implode.
We'll have cousin Eddie standing out in the front yard.
Something's full.
Is there a loading dock at this school?
There is a
Andrew?
loading dock. Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yep.
That would make it a lot easier bringing food and stuff too,
Yeah.
equipment and everything else.
And on that note, just remember that there is a school, so they have some food supplies that are there. But, it's a question of that you can ask is do you have access to that?
What's the head count at the school, the population?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
How many students and staff are on site?
Don't have that information, unfortunately.
Only other thing I can think of is like a family reunification office or area. If people have displaced and don't know where everyone is, you can turn one of those classrooms on the second floor, like 3013 or whatever, into something where people can come and talk to someone about finding out if their family members are there or whatever. Outside that, I think we've covered everything else that I could think of.
And Barb put in the chat that we should have areas for religious considerations as well. But I think we touched on pretty much everything that I can think of.
So one question for you to consider, a couple questions to consider is who's going to run the shelter?
You could use Red Cross in Oklahoma. That's a limited resource. You could use your Medical Reserve Corps through your state or local health department. Emergency management volunteers, potential.
Their teams.
Yeah, CERT team resources, and then partnering with a lot of nonprofits, Homeless Alliance people, and trying to think who else we used during the COVID response in our state. But those nonprofits in that community probably have some resources too that they can access.
And depending on the time frame we have lead time, there's also groups like Samaritan's Purse and Team Rubicon and other folks like that could assist with running sheltering operations. And they also have resources such as the portable toilets and showers we spoke about, also portable laundry facilities.
Okay.
Yeah, we have Oklahoma, I know we have some Oklahoma specific ones, but you also have the Southern Baptist, whatever that group is that does stuff, and some of those other ones that are down in other parts of the country.
Okay, other question for you is how long do you think it will take for you to be able to stand up this emergency shelter?
It's a resource question. If the resources are on hand from, say, the Red Cross or another one of those NGOs, setup shouldn't be too bad. If it's limited resources or we're grappling, I couldn't even imagine a time frame to give you.
I've
Let's
seen
say you're
shelters
the-
stood up.
Oh, go ahead,
Um,
Michael. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
I
you.
was gonna say, I saw a Red Cross shelter stood up within, was it 8 hours for an earthquake event in Cushing, Oklahoma 1 year? It was less than 8 hours. So I didn't shelter as many people as we're talking about, but obviously they can get things in motion within 8 to 12 hours, probably.
Mhm.
Again, depending on like what Arthur said about location, resources, and what you're talking about here.
Okay, how are you going to meet special dietary needs? Also, durable medical equipment, any items that, hygiene items, feminine hygiene items, specialty items, any medicines that individuals may not have brought with them. How are you going to address those sorts of needs?
With the durable medical equipment, I can definitely say you can probably call on. We have a warehouse in Oklahoma that's got certain medical equipment and resources. It's also known as the RSS warehouse that handles the Strategic National Stockpile
Yep.
Resources. So you can probably get some resources from there. You've got healthcare coalitions across the state that you can get into for durable medical equipment. I would say your food stuff. At first, you're probably not able to really meet those dietary needs for the first 48 to 72 hours, but you're eventually going to get there. It's just going to take time. So sometimes you just can't meet that until you get the resources in. It's all about logistics at this point.
Mhm. Okay. So we're almost at about 20 minutes. What I would like to ask you to do is to identify, what's your, let's say, course of action or your various courses of action that you're going to take. You've mentioned some of them, but I want you to pull them all together. And if you could incorporate what your fellow teammates who are not able to participate, through the audio, who have posted on the chat. So there's some good ideas that are there as well that I see. So who wants to take that job on? Who wants to brief out, I guess? That's the question.
I'll take a stab at it, and if anybody else wants to jump in and pick up any of the pieces that I miss. So we're working on sheltering 1,000 folks in this school. We'll be doing access and functional needs, special medical sheltering on the first floor, in the gym areas, the gym playroom areas. Working our way up to the first floor. We'll also be using the cafeteria there. We'll be bringing food and other supplies in through the loading dock that I assume is adjacent to the cafeteria. In those supplies, we'll be pulling supplies for the special medical needs, feminine hygiene products, and elderly care products as well will be part of those things that we're bringing in for the specific groups that need things. We'll also be taking into consideration religious observances, not only in the sheltering, but in our food prep, if that is necessary. Working our way up to the second, third, and fourth and fifth floors. We'll be setting up a command center, probably on one of the higher floors. Someone mentioned something about antennas for UHF, ham radio, etc. That way we're close to the roof. There are no elevators in this building, so we'll be taking into consideration when we're assigning housing locations to our shelterees. We'll also be setting up spaces for folks with service animals, not necessarily that don't necessarily need space in the access and functional needs space. I'm trying to think if I left anything out. Security, we'll be partnering with local law enforcement for security. be partnering with probably our local healthcare coalition to provide the services for the special medical needs shelters. We'll be setting up a quarantine area if necessary at the top wings there, the 302, 308 level, or room 202, 212 level. Keep me honest. Did I leave anything out?
Team?
I see some head shaking, so.
I don't think so.
And I think the plan, if I understand a time frame to make this SMART objective, is sometime around 8 hours that you'll be able to stand this up. Is that what you could is that what you feel that you could agree to?
I would say 12.
Oh, understood.
Getting things moving, it would be 12, and then yeah, you're starting to get it stood up and getting things. But again, depends on resources. I've deployed people down to Louisiana during Hurricane Ida, and they weren't the only shelter operating. So when they got down there, they had almost no resources with a COVID wing and a non-COVID wing, and they were the 3 people that were working. Like, it just didn't work. I mean, they got it stood up, but it was not the easiest task in the world. So
yep.
People are going to make it work. Your professional staff are going to get it done. It's just, what are they going to have to do to get to that point?
Yep. So there are a couple of items that some folks in the chat mentioned here. I don't know if you want to, if Art, you prefer Arthur? Is that correct?
Art is fine.
Art is fine. So Art, did you want to go through some of these things here, and in terms of PIO and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I was reading that food resources available across the country. Yeah, we need a temporary social media for broadcast information and a PIO liaison. I would hope that would be stuff that's running out of the Emergency Operations Center for the municipality that this shelter is located in. Obviously, we will have some command structure located in the building, but for United messaging and things along those lines, I'd leave all that messaging back to the Emergency Operations Center for the event.
Yep, that's a good guideline to follow. Although I have had microphones stuck in my face managing an emergency shelter during Sandy, so and I've told them, you need to speak to the PIO. Here's the number, and then they still get the information wrong. They will basically write whatever they feel that they want to, so which can be frustrating.
My answer is always talk to the guy in the white hat.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So good job on that. Little hot wash. What happened and how did it feel? Okay. So let me start with what happened and how did it feel going through there? Don't be shy. So Mark Sacco says, sounded pretty good to me.
I'd say it's interesting to hear the different perspectives across the country of what resources are out there, how things differ. I think Art said he's in New York. Tom said he was in Boston. I'm in Oklahoma. So many different resources in those different areas, and different on how things operate, and how far you have to go to get resources. During the Oklahoma City bombing in '95, the resources they were pulling had to come from all the way on the other side of the state, plus out of the state. When you had the Boston Marathon bombing, they have five Trauma 1 centers within, what was it, like 10 miles of the bombing site. In Oklahoma, we have 1 Trauma 1, so that can get overwhelmed very quickly. So your resources are so different, and how far you have to go for those resources can affect. And when you're talking about a shelter like this, you'd be talking about a hurricane. So some of those more distant resources are maybe the only thing you have left to pull from. So it's interesting to hear how different people approach this based on their knowledge and experience from where they live or work.
Okay. So let me ask, in hearing how you went through this and discussed it, you identified what resources may have been missing, what additional resources that you might need, what other organizations you might pull from if they're available. So this is an area that I'm very familiar with because I've done some work in coastal storm plan training and preparations for the city of New York. So in a way, I've been exposed to that. I've also undergone Red Cross training and stuff of that sort. So what would you do if you had more time? How much more time do you think would be helpful to have to plan for this? Let's say you have as much time as you feel that you needed to do that. Days, weeks, months?
I mean, it would be amazing if you had at least 2 weeks notice. I mean, it'd be amazing for that to get all the resources and staging and get everything ready to go. But ideally, as an emergency manager, professional, you want to be thinking about this years and like, how does this look? That's why we have plans, typically. You want to be looking at, okay, what is that look like and where am I going to pull from those things? So you start setting up those partnerships, getting those resources identified, understanding the process. If you're not in public health, you may not understand requesting like a resource like the Strategic National Stockpile can take all the way it takes to the governor to approve it in every state and territory. So if you don't understand those concepts and you're getting to that response and now you're trying to get those resources, it delays it. So that's why you do this years in advance, and we exercise and we train and we plan and we do that whole constant wheel kind of thing.
Right.
So
what if you had more team members? How would you, so you have more people to plan and more people to help. How would you handle that?
Delegation of authority. I mean, if you've got a big team, it makes more hands make the work easier as long as it's coordinated.
Okay. Is it Aga? Hello? Did you now? So, how would you organize the team? How would you pull that together?
use ICS, basic form of ICS would help run, your operations is managing your shelter itself. You've got a logistics and a planning section. Obviously, you're gonna need every section at this point because your finance alone, you're starting to charge up quite a bit, and then you're gonna go for FEMA reimbursement probably down the road at 1,000 people shelter. So you've got your PIO we already talked about. You need a liaison to liaison with all these different partners we've mentioned, and obviously you gotta have there's no way around the safety part in that kind of facility. So yeah, you've pretty much got everything activated, and a basic ICS organizational probably sets you pretty good on a foundation with minor adjustments as you go kind of thing.
What I did hear, Art, you actually addressed the accessibility of the facility. There are certainly other issues regarding disability access and functional needs to run this kind of facility, not just in terms of how it's laid out and what's available there, and how people are going to get around if they do need to, but additional services and how you provide them. So what if your legal issues then are brought to the fore? How do you address that? And this is a longer discussion, but it's these types of things that I would like you to think about, because what I want to do is I'm going to roll right now into and great work on this, right, in terms of thinking through this problem. Your team, and this is not unusual, there's an added challenge that you're working through, which is you're all on a virtual meeting. So you don't have the ability to actually see each other face to face and communicate that way. You don't have the level of familiarity that you do, but that happens sometimes in these situations. And then you have some folks that are, are only available through chat. So again, that's sort of an artificiality, but communications unfortunately sometimes does break down. So what I would like to present to you here is, and that was just an opening exercise to sort of elicit some of the challenges, some of the planning challenges. Some of them again are artificialities because I gave you basically 20 minutes to sort of plan for this based upon your experience. You use the collective experience to pull that together. So you did a great job. The idea behind pulling in project management is to go from a point of confusion, chaos, and a feeling of being overwhelmed to one where you provide clarity, structure, and feeling empowered. Now, ICS is one way of doing that, of organizing people, but the roadmap of the process, the methodology to actually work through those problems, that's where project management can come in to be very helpful. So some of these things, and I know Michael and perhaps a few others have gone through this. I'm going to go through some of the basics of covering how to develop a project scope statement. So we're pulling back from the actual, development of in the heat of the moment when we have a black sky or gray sky situation where someone says, you've got to go and set up this kind of facility, to how do you develop a project plan to actually develop that, to develop the plan, to develop the drill or exercise, those sorts of things, the poet, so to speak, to build out that capability. So our module learning objectives for this second module here is to define and assess who the project stakeholders are, to describe what a scope statement is and the key elements of it, to develop a basic scope statement as a foundation of project scope, to explain the function of a work breakdown structure, because that's a key element that comes out of a scope, and how that work breakdown structure functions as a core of the project plan. So just so that everyone knows, we have until 1 o'clock. If you do need to take a break, go use facilities, grab something to eat, that's fine. We will do one more short little exercise. It'll be very, very short, but we'll do that towards the end. And, and then we'll finish. So I'm planning to get done by 1 o'clock and leave some time for any Q&A and that sort of thing. There's a lot of content to cover here. And if you do have questions, please take yourself off mic, put it in the chat. I'm happy to answer it. So I want to cover some of the key project terms. So a project is a temporary endeavor that's undertaken to produce a unique product, a service, or result. And project management is the application of the knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to meet those project requirements. A program is something at a higher level. So when we're managing programs, and again, we use these terms quite frequently in the area of emergency management, programs are longer term types of endeavors where we have 3-5 year, let's say, programs that we're running, where we have projects that are in between. So those projects might be constituted of, everything from our plans to an exercise to, equipment that we're buying, systems that we're incorporating into how we do things. Those are the projects that become part of that program. And you have regular cycles for funding and things of that sort, fiscal years and so on and so forth that we deal with. A portfolio is sort of a collection. It's like an investment portfolio, but except it's project and program related. It's still investment of resources, dollars, et cetera, people's staff time. And those are managed collectively. They may or may not be related to one another, as opposed to a program where there is a relationship to one another. So we might have a plan, we might have a training that comes after that, an exercise that takes place after that, sort of that sequence. That's part of that program. Portfolios group them together so that they can be managed for greater efficiency. So we can decide where the organization is going to invest its time and resources to create the capabilities and performance expectations for that agency or organization. So I'm going to stop there just for a moment, do a quick check-in. If anybody has questions, please let me know. What I covered so far is pretty clear. Okay, good. So let me just briefly explain the differences between project and operational work. Projects are finite. They're designed to deliver an outcome, a unique outcome, product or service, as I said before. There's a degree of novelty associated when we say unique. In other words, something different. So while we might create a plan for, let's say, PPE distribution, for example, it's, we have distribution plans for other types of resources. Okay, there might be some similarities there, but there might be some differences, and that's what makes that unique. Operations, on the other hand, are routine work. So it's what we do when we say standard operating procedures, when we go and activate, let's say, an EOC, it's not a project, right? In principle, we're activating the EOC. We have EOC procedures, standard operating procedures. In principle, it should be routine at what level we're activating an EOC and operating it. So it's what we do and perform repeatedly, and we look at areas where we can improve. Those become improvement plans, and those can be then made into projects, or they might be parts of programs that are incorporated. But that's the difference between operational work and our project plans. And you'll see a chart that's there, just designed to illustrate typically how this happens within an organization. At the top, an organization sets its mission and vision of what it's looking to accomplish. And then out of that, they plan and manage those strategic goals. This is sort of part of the normal process of things. Out of that strategic planning of goals, we create our programs and projects. That's to the right there, that are part of the portfolio of what we create. Those programs and portfolios, or portfolios of programs and projects, excuse me, my mouth is getting a little bit further ahead of my mind, is synchronized to deliver value to the operational planning and management of what that organization does on a regular basis. So, any questions regarding that? Okay. And again, I'm happy to go back if it's not. So let me just take a little sidestep here and explain why project management is a good fit for emergency management, because this is something I routinely, not late at night, but often think about is, there's a methodology for project management. There's a methodology for emergency management. How do these two come together, and how can that be a sort of value for managing projects, as opposed to, emergency management, we're all steeped in ICS and NIMS and, SEMS, if you're out in California and stuff like that, which, of course, ICS and NIMS is derived from. So why is project management important? Well, most planning, okay, even though I'd say the operational tempo for emergency management agencies has increased, especially in the last 5 years. COVID's been, sort of the overwhelming indicator of some of that, but there's still blue sky emergency that we have to contend with. Unlike gray sky or black sky events, we don't, in those events, we don't have the luxury of being able to really think through everything. We need a plan to go to basically, to deal with and to respond to the emergency. So that blue sky planning is really what project management does well. The other part that makes project management appropriate is, it's risk versus opportunity based decision making for the investments where we put in place mitigation or preparedness projects. So, one of the key elements in managing a program is knowing where we're going to invest resources or funding, so that there's a risk return or cost benefit analysis that, then, lets us know how much the project will cost and what that potential return is, and also who will be involved, how long they'll be involved, and so forth. When things are just thrown on the planning board without any sort of conscious idea of, are we overloading people? Are we creating bottlenecks with certain things? That is where project management can help rationalize that. The third area is that we need to manage diverse stakeholder expectations, and those stakeholder expectations, there's a variety of them, and we're going to talk about who those stakeholders are. But we've got initiatives that are undertaken by emergency management agencies that include everything from different players, different other departments, other agencies, so PD, law enforcement agencies, what have you, fire, EMS, sanitation. We talked about social service agencies, outside partners, community-based, faith-based organizations, private sector. I think I already mentioned federal, state, local, tribal, etc. So there's a lot of different players that are at the table. Those that are part of the project and those who are beneficiaries of the project, and some in both spheres, so to speak. So much of the projects, programs, these are federally, state, sometimes tribal or territorial grant-funded projects. A good deal of them from the federal government, whether it's FEMA, whether it's, and FEMA has a whole host of different types of programs, mitigation programs, preparedness programs. But there's also, talk about ASPR and, Health and Human Services and CDC funded grants and things of that sort, HUD grants, so it runs the gamut, and it goes to the same, or in some states that budget for it, that exists as well. And also city, town tax levy funds to pay for mitigation measures to improve levels of readiness and capabilities. So the last thing, and this again ties back into what we talked about in terms of stakeholders, is we're working across cross-functionally across those agencies, departments, as I mentioned before, to accomplish these strategic objectives. So it's the whole, what we talked about, the whole of government. It's not just the whole of government. We're talking about federal, state, local, tribal, the SLTT, as we often refer to it as an acronym, but also the whole community that's involved as well. So talked about private sector, NGOs, CBOs, faith-based organizations, institutions of higher education, K through 12, preschools, etc., in order to get the job done. So it's not just us; it's leveraging that whole community, so to speak. All right, so that's why this is I'd say an effective methodology. So the last, or not the last point, but another point I want to make here is that when we look at emergency management and public safety plans, what goes into those plans to address emergency management mission capabilities? Well, we're defining the who, the what, the where, the when, the how to accomplish those mission objectives, to identify the staff, the space, the systems, and the stuff. And when it comes to what we call COOP planning in government or business continuity planning in the private sector, we're talking about people, places, property, people, places, and property for continuity. Those are all resources, basically, again, we have to manage to accomplish it. A nice fit for project management. So let's now get into the actual practice itself. So why develop a scope statement? And a scope statement basically is a description of what the project is going to accomplish at a high level. So, one of the things I often say is well-designed plans aren't just fancy Gantt charts. I've seen and reviewed many Gantt charts that are not a reflection of reality. And you'll see a diagram here to the right on the slide. This is the, I believe it's it was the operational coalition in Afghanistan and this is a map of the process. I've gone through it. I still, to this day, I find it challenging to try to understand all of this. And just to illustrate that, plans need to be transparent. They need to be clear to people in order for them to be effective. Sort of when you look at a map and we go into a mall or a store, where am I in this place and where do I need to get to? That's really what project planning is designed to do. So good project planning effectively engages stakeholders for collaborating on work. They know what's expected of them. They know when they need to do it, and they know when it's expected to be delivered. That's when it's good, when it breaks down. And that doesn't mean that everything functions nice and easily. still means that, you know, the project manager and the team need to work together to make sure that things are maintained and that momentum continues. It means developing and managing a project scope. That's the critical first step. And that outcome is at the end of the project is an enhanced emergency mission. So when I talk about scope, there's a, when I talk about it in general, that means the scope of work that includes a scope statement of work breakdown structure. When I talk about that scope statement is specific to that document. Okay. So how do we get to a scope statement? Well, one of the first steps that we're going to take is to identify key stakeholder requirements. In order to do that, we need to know who those stakeholders are. So, you know, you have the diagram here of that, you know, whole community as I talked about. So I'm not going to repeat that again. But we need to consider from that whole of the community who actually receives the output of that project. Who's the one who's going to be, you know, managing the system? Who's going to be the one who's using the system? Who's going to be the one who's sustaining the system? What benefits to the public or to those agencies is that going to? What kind of enhancements? What kind of performance improvement? We're talking about communications. We're talking about logistics and those sorts of things. Who provides input into the project? Okay, there's a whole gamut, right? We talk about legal. We could talk about social services. We could talk about, you know, the folks on the log side, on the operation side, and so forth. Who has oversight over the project? Is there a steering committee of leaders on top who might be from within our agency? They might be from related agencies or partner agencies that are involved. Who has other related responsibilities to this project that are providing? So there might be borrowed resources that we have to this. It might be finance and admin that play, you know, part in this, or it might be human resources that might, you know, may not be fully invested, but they have input or engage with it. Who reaps the rewards from accomplishing a successful project? Certainly, the public should be the final beneficiary, or if you're in a commercial corporation, your customers that you're serving on a regular basis so that you don't have disruptions in services and things of that sort. Who suffers the penalties if the project isn't successful? Usually it's the project manager and sometimes the project team members. And I say that laughingly because I've had projects that have not, you know, always been entirely successful, but, you know, there are, of course, circumstances that are there. But, you know, that's an important thing to take into consideration. So rewards and the penalties. And then, you know, at a larger scale, who's impacted by the project? It's not just who's going to receive the rewards, but who's impacted by it. And there might be both positive and negative impacts as a result, unexpected. So for example, if we put an ADA ramp into a school so that it's accessible for emergency sheltering, there are benefits to the public in general. There's families who can come in with walkers, you know, so on a regular basis. So there's these sorts of things that, you know, sort of basic examples of impacts of that. And then there's, you know, when we're building out new capabilities and things like that, there might be disruptions. So if we take, you know, let's say a facility offline because we want to make it available for points of dispensing and that sort of thing. Well, that's a disruption to the public. Maybe minor, but there's a minor impact that's there. You just need to be cognizant of these sorts of things. Okay, so this is just to illustrate when we're talking about identifying key stakeholders. When we think of it from an emergency management point of view, we have those typical sort of first response agencies. I would probably pull Public Works, which is in that second circle of responders, probably more into that first circle, especially when it comes to sanitation, which is actually sanitation is a separate agency. They should probably be in that first circle of responders, but both those sorts of agencies. You have a second circle of responders that are sort of that, you know, are there to support that first circle, and then that third circle of responders, you know, sort of we talked about, you know, we identified those groups. So just to give you an idea conceptually of sort of how this might be considered when we look at it collectively from an emergency management point of view. So I want to stop for a moment, just do a quick check-in. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments? Okay. And again, please either take yourself off mute, put it in the chat if you have questions or thoughts. Okay, so we've identified our key stakeholders. We get a better understanding about, what role that they play. There's sort of three main areas we want to take a look at. One is we want to look at what their requirements are. What are stakeholders looking to get from the project? Okay. And they may be benefits that needs that they need to fulfill, performance expectations from the outcome. And certainly there are increasing requirements put into on emergency management agencies and how they're expected to perform and who they're serving. So we see it every day. So we see it in both in major cities, other parts of the country. They're being tasked with addressing the needs of asylum seekers and housing them and providing for needs that are there, which was not something that was sort of in the cards 10 years ago. So some of those might be, as far as requirements, linked to core capabilities as identified from an after action review or an audit. What's the level of interest that a stakeholder has? When it comes to, for example, a UAV project for a local police department, a stakeholder group on the project might be members of the public who may be missing an elderly parent. That's clearly something where they have a vested interest in finding that person, or if it's a missing child, an Amber Alert and searching for them, or for the police department itself, they're looking for criminal suspects and they're trying to find them. But there's also legal ramifications, right? So there's lawyers who might be involved in sort of limiting the ability to do that, as we've seen in some jurisdictions. And then related to interest, what is the level of influence that they have on the project? So it can be positive, negative in terms of looking at it. So again, looking at it from a public point of view, are there interest groups that may have some vested interest? So legal advocacy groups, the ACLU or U.S. Department of Justice. We've seen them get involved when it comes to access and functional needs and basically bring lawsuits against certain jurisdictions. We've seen it out in Los Angeles. We've seen it here in the New York City area. And if you haven't figured out by now, I am based in the New York City area. So, but I've done work in other parts of the country, so I'm somewhat familiar with, the variety of different issues that are out there. So one of the tools that can be used to help to identify and manage stakeholders and their levels of interest, influence, and requirements is what's called a stakeholder analysis matrix. We have one here, and that's based upon a police department's unmanned aerial vehicle, or what's called a drone project. And so you see some examples here of the stakeholders, the requirements, their interest and influence on the project, and just basically a rating. And the rating is an average if we use high, medium, low, high being 3, medium being 2, 1 being low, sort of doing an average based upon that, and coming to sort of prioritize these stakeholders and the requirements based on that. So I'm not going to read through these. Happy to make the slides available afterwards if folks are interested. If you have some examples of the vendors, grant funding agencies, subject matter experts, and members of the public. Okay, we're going to forego doing this because we don't have time. But when you have time, I'd certainly recommend going through this process. If you're beginning a project, or perhaps even doing a post-mortem on a project, it can be quite helpful. So as I explained before, what's a project scope statement? It's a document that's issued by the project sponsor that formally authorizes the existence of a project, and it provides the project manager with the authority to begin applying organizational resources, and that also may include budget to the project activities. That's a classic definition from the project management body of knowledge, also known as the PMBOK. A scope statement describes the high-level intent. Sometimes within an organization, it might be referred to as a project charter. If it's used as part of a bidding process, it might be called a scope of work or a statement of work. When it's used externally for the organization, But in my experience, it's, I've seen less charter lately and more just the scope of work or statement of work. But it's usually approved by senior management, the client or the stakeholders. Usually there's a review there and it becomes part of a contract document. So what elements would go into, and this is not the only type of format, but it's one that I think covers some of the major bases. What's the project name? Who are the key stakeholders? Client, the project manager, if there's an internal sponsor and a date that, this has been put in place. What's the goal? SMART goals that we talked about. Business case, making sure there's justification for the project. What are the major deliverables, phases, and major objectives? Now, these are not, you can do it by deliverables, you could do it by phases or objectives, as you may be familiar with, certainly from ICS planning, but they're not mutually exclusive. You can use both a mix of deliverables. I prefer to use deliverables because it's very clear at the end of the day when you completed a deliverable and what that looks like, because it should be measurable, should be quantifiable to a degree. Related to that, what are the critical success measures by which we will consider that this project has been a success? See, Michael has put the FEP or PHEP, depending on how you pronounce it, capabilities, yes. So, yeah, there might be some differences in terms of stakeholders, I understand. So constraints, so how do we handle all of this first stuff in terms of the goal of the business case? We want to handle it with what I call care, that's constraints. What are the major constraints that we're operating within? The most obvious ones are time and budget or cost. But then there's others that we need to consider, right? We talked about regulatory requirements. There might be requirements put upon us in terms of core capabilities, in terms of what we need to meet based on an AAR. What are the assumptions? What resources or what do we assume to be available to us at the get-go? And if we question any of those assumptions, they may turn into risks. And then there are risks that we can identify from the start, looking at projects. Some of those are team members that may not be available, resources that may be delayed or may not be available to us, or pulled back on, budget cuts, those sorts of things. And then exclusions. What things are we not going to do? What are we not going to include in our project? So if we're undertaking a new software project, are we including maintenance and support? Are we including help desk for those sorts of things? And then finally, we look at what are the major milestones for the scope? What's the final deadline related to those milestones? And what's the estimated budget at this point, if we can arrive at that? Usually there's, that budgets are sort of derived from, similar types of projects that are undertaken. There's usually a rough order of magnitude estimating. I'm going to talk a little about estimating as we sort of go through here. I'm going to move along here. I think most folks are familiar with creating SMART goals and objectives. Any questions? Anyone not familiar with SMART? So the next step beyond just creating that scope statement is creating a work breakdown structure. And a work breakdown is a breakdown of the work to a level at which it can be reasonably estimated and managed. And this is, I think, one of the key rules that I follow when it comes to general management practices. How do we manage things effectively and make the best use of our time, as opposed to managing minutia or managing things at too high a level where we're not able to keep track. So the first rule is in the simple way of remembering this is what I call level 1, 10, and 100%. So level 1 is break that work down at a level which we can estimate and manage the work. 1 means a deliverable should be expressed as a complete unit or part, not multiple items combined into one. So when something can be broken out, it should be. So as an example, let's say we're developing a software module and part of that is registering our shelter clients. That would be one deliverable. If we're registering our shelter staff, that would be a separate deliverable. It's a mistake to combine those two because there's differences in terms of how we're processing that, how we're doing that for shelter clients versus our staff. And the needs for those two modules are going to be different. So that's just an example of breaking those out so that they can be managed as one. The rule of 10, tasks in general should be no longer than 10 working days. They should be no shorter than they shouldn't be shorter than 2 days. So, that's sort of a, that's, if they're longer than 10 working days, then generally that's 2 weeks. And in my experience, when things go beyond 2 weeks, we're measuring things in a month, a project can go off the rails very easily. So tasks should be also expressed as a verb noun format. So action oriented. So we know when it's complete. It shouldn't be we have a meeting. Okay, that's great. You're having a meeting. What's the outcome of the meeting? We're conducting a meeting to accomplish X. That's what should be clear. What is the outcome of that task? And the last item is 100% complete. Each level should roll up to complete the next higher level above it. Okay, so those are the rules in terms of creating a work breakdown structure. You can see some examples. You can create a work breakdown structure based on an outline format on the right there. Program design, first draft, second draft, final version. You can see the verb noun format for how each of those is created. You'll also see a graphical illustration of a work breakdown structure, similar to an organization chart. You start with a project program at top, and you break it down by deliverables or phases or objectives, and then by the tasks underneath that. One just general rule here to note is developing all these plans, especially a work breakdown structure, should be a team sport. So incorporate the team in this process. Okay, so a hierarchical work breakdown structure is a hierarchical decomposition of all the work to be performed at the project. Usually I have the goal at the top broken down into the major deliverables or phases. We identify those major activities from those deliverables. We develop tasks. Once we develop those tasks, then we can look at the resources that each of those tasks will utilize and the requirements for them, and then identify the task responsibilities. Who's going to manage that specific task? And then we want to document that task information. That's the creation of the work breakdown structure. So as I mentioned before, you can create a work breakdown structure based upon deliverables, phases. You can see items that are here. They might be field operation guides. They might be a training, which is represented by that certificate of achievement. It could be flood barriers or flood mitigation measures. It could be broken down by function. So it could be broken down by design, production, transportation, or logistics and delivery, and assembly. So that's that's illustrated at the bottom there. I don't know why we're oops. Okay, it's a duplicate. I'm sorry about that. So work breakdown structure, as I mentioned before, for planning purposes under standard project management, is the core of the project plan. If you developed an effective work breakdown structure, it enables the project team, led by a project manager, to create an effective budget, to create an effective schedule, to create an HR plan, a communications plan, a quality plan, procurement plan, a risk plan. All these things sort of emanate. Now, are they siloed? No. There's a relationship between the risk and quality. There's a relationship between procurement and schedule. That's the part of integrating the plan that's part of the science and art, if you will, of managing the project plan. Just some final thoughts here from a colleague of mine who's was the acting director of DISH's, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services here in New York State. It's from Greg Brunel. We all know the old cliche in emergency management that the value is not in the plan, but in the planning process. And he stated, I've experienced a lot of planning processes that at the time really educated and trained each other with multiple stakeholders in the room about everyone's different capabilities, authorities, responsibilities, and capacities. And the project management creates a life cycle for that planning effort. So we need to be engaging in re-stimulating a shared learning experience, so that knowledge is in our head. So that's a quote from him, from Greg. Actually, last saw him, I think actually the IAEM conference out in California. Projects, any questions on scope and work breakdown structure? So I'm covering things rather fast here. All right, project scheduling. And I apologize if we run through these fairly quickly. There's a lot of ground to cover here. So what I want to cover here in project scheduling is by the end so that you're able to describe the project schedule, its purpose, and explain the methods for developing a project schedule. So I want to take a moment, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There are some videos that you will have access to that cover this in probably a lot more slower and more methodical way. It covers it in the same way, so we're not going to be able to do all the exercises we like today. But I'd certainly like to invite you. I do want to, if Dan, if it's all right, with you, just a quick plug. I do have a virtual session. It's a 6-week session on project management in greater depth, where we'll have more time to be able to do this synchronously. And there'll be a link at the end where you can find out more information and sign up. And I'm happy to talk to you about that further. So that's my little plug on the side there. But I do want to explain what I can of the methods and to why. So what's a project schedule? Well, we might have in mind, okay, I see project schedules, I know what they are. Essentially, a project planning, it's a planning tool for scheduling work and our meetings around that work. So where we are planning individual work, or where we have paired or multiple staff members who are working together, or where they need to understand where the dependency is between that work. It's a snapshot for progress tracking and to see where things stand. Are we on project? Are we on schedule? Are we off schedule? And then to start to look at what some of the corrective actions are. But it's also a forecast for future progress. We know where we've come and we know where we're at. We can get an idea of whether we're going to be on schedule or not. So some of the major steps in developing a schedule. Well, the first is developing a network diagram. That's the sequence of the work that we need to do. It's estimating the time involved for each of those tasks and elaborating the schedule and developing what we would call classically a bar or Gantt chart. Now, is a bar or Gantt chart absolutely necessary? No. You can do it with or without it, but it gives you a nice graphical idea of where those dependencies are and to know what that schedule is going to look like. And then, there's other things that need to be incorporated into that. So what is a network diagram? It's a graphical view of the logical sequence of project work. The tasks are what used to be called work packages, in a sort of older term for it. So it's discrete elements of work that get done and then passed on to the next part of the process in the chain. It illustrates that total project duration by highlighting what we would call the critical path. That's the longest path through the network. And it's an essential element to accurately develop the schedule. And the next step after developing that network is to make sure that you've added the resource and the specific dates to the schedule. So first step is in developing a network diagram is we take those tasks, just the work. We're not doing the summary deliverables at top, because if we do that, then we're adding redundant time. So we just take the tasks, the work packages, so to speak, from the work breakdown structure. We take those, we sequence those tasks by establishing basically precedence, what needs to come before another task in order to do it. It might be multiple tasks. There might be different relationships, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Once we've done that, we've created that sequence, we can get an idea of how long this project is going to take. And then we add milestones to it, stage gates. Where do we want to have reviews along the way? Most organizations include those as part of a major project, okay, where we might develop a quality plan and perform a risk review and those sorts of things. And as I said, we then make sure that we add durations to those tasks so we know how long that's going to take. I want to talk just briefly about dependencies. So most dependencies will be a finish to start relationship. Task needs to finish before another task starts. Makes sense. There are tasks where you have a start to start relationship. One task can start, and then as soon as that one has started, another can start, usually with a lag in as part of that. So there's a time frame. So for example, I know it's not necessarily strictly emergency management related. If we were building, let's say, a sewage pipe, we have to dig in the ground for a tunnel for it to go through. Well, once we started digging, at a certain point, we can start laying down that sewage pipe. That's in principle, start to start. So once it's started, we have a lag of, let's say, a certain period, we can start laying down that pipe. So it would be an illustration of that start to start. There's some tasks which have a finish relationship. So one task can't finish until another one finishes. Again, sort of borrowing from construction, if we're putting in an HVAC system, an HVAC system can't be functional in most buildings nowadays unless the electronics are finished in a building. So once we've completed the electronics, we can complete the installation of the HVAC system, since it will probably use sensors and use electricity to run it, that sort of thing. So that's a finish to finish. One finishes. Again, usually there's some sort of interplay between them. There might be, again, some sort of lag between how one thing finishes and another finishes, but that's that relationship. And then there are some tasks, this is rare, but it exists, where there is a start to finish relationship, where one task can't finish until the other one starts, okay? It's again, you may need to wrap your head around it, only because it sort of runs different than the finish to start. And this probably is best illustrated from our field of emergency management, where in principle, you can't finish your response operations until recovery is started. So it's sort of like passing the baton, if you will. So we can't begin one now. Is there a gray area that's there? Absolutely. Exists in most responses and recovery operations. But in principle, that's that relationship. So those are task dependencies. Any questions on those? Because I covered those rather quickly. I'm going to forego this because we talked about, so there's leads, lags. A lead is where something needs to start before another one starts. A lag is where one finishes and the next task finishes, but there's a buffer there. And those are used to account sometimes for what I refer to as non-value added types of activities, where it needs to go out for some sort of regulatory review. There's no cost associated with it. There's only a time associated with it. So we incorporate that there. I might include a person that it's associated with, but there's a lag time that I'm incorporating in it, because I know that there needs to be some approval or review, and I'm accounting for that time in the project schedule. There's also what we call hammock tasks or buffer tasks. Those are useful, again, for accommodating where you have to have a resource in advance. So for example, if we know we need to, if we're doing flood barriers, we need to stage materials at a warehouse before we start constructing it. That's where a hammock task can be helpful, to accommodate for that time for procurement and having it in place before we begin the work. Where it might be employed, the equipment might be employed, or those resources might be employed. I'm going to, since we have a little bit less than a half an hour, I'm going to just recommend that you review the video. And Dan, after we're done, we could point folks to the lessons on this in terms of durations and how tasks are done, as far as that's concerned, how that's put together.
Yeah.
Okay, and just briefly on task duration estimating, there's what's called rough order of magnitude. That's a rough estimate from similar projects or project activities. There's what's called parametric estimating. Parametric estimating uses rules of thumb, which are common to industry practice. If you ask someone who's a builder, they can give you an idea of how much time and cost it would be to lay bricks or to pour cement, depending upon how many cubic feet that might be used. If you're developing a new course that's for the classroom, someone who's an instructional designer and developer can tell you how long it would take to develop a one-day basic course, that sort of thing, and how much that might cost. There's bottom-up estimating. Those are detailed estimates derived by subject matter experts based upon their knowledge and expertise. Now, They may use parametric estimating, but they're usually doing it based upon details. How many hours is each of these going to take? So if it's software development, you might get hours for specific elements or requirements and how long that they take. That's based on those specific activities. In addition to those estimating methods, there's general guidance and rules that I follow, which is called, again, it's an acronym. I would love to come up with something that sounds better than this, but estimating time and cost. O, it is such an art. So what does O, it is such an art stand for? O is the owner of the task has responsibility for providing the estimate. That way they have ownership over it. They're the ones who are responsible for it. Rather than a project manager assigning or telling that person how much time it's going to take. There's the human productivity rule. People are only productive for a certain amount of time during a given day. If you're doing knowledge work, it's maybe 5 to 6 hours, if you're lucky, between all the meetings and everything else that you have to do. That doesn't mean that people don't work longer hours. They may, but there's still other things that they have to do. They have to eat lunch, they've got to go take breaks, that sort of thing. But then there's also learning curves that are involved in human productivity. So people are going to be productive either within a certain day or over a period of time to improve in how they're doing something. And then there's lessons learned where they can enhance it. And so accuracy for an estimate depends on the level of detail. The more detail you have, the more accurate it is going to be, and vice versa. There are ranges of estimates, and there are risks associated with those ranges. So if I'm going to go to bid for a specific project, if I look at the possibility, if I look at that distribution curve of when projects might finish, and sort of my optimistic and pessimistic, there are risks associated with each of those. If I'm using the pessimistic, okay, I might be 95% of the time I might meet that time frame, but the project, the client might not be willing to wait that long for it to be done. They want it to be done quicker. So there's a balance between how much time I think it's going to take and what I'm going to do to try to be competitive and what we're competing on. And that also holds true for costs as well. So those ranges and what we're providing have risks associated with them. And then lastly, there's a trade-off in terms of time, cost, and resource. So for certain tasks, we might want to hire somebody who has greater expertise. They might be more expensive, but we know that they're going to be able to get the job done versus somebody who's junior, who may require rework, they may require more support, and maybe quality issues with the work that they do. That's true not only of that, but it's also maybe true of outsourcing it. It may be more expensive to outsource things. We know it's going to be done at a level that we can depend upon versus doing it in-house. Discussion based upon that, but that's basically those 5 different elements of estimating time and cost that we can apply to both. I'm going to skip over this example as much as I'd like to cover it, but I hope to finally get to that. Last thing is my little note on multitasking. The irony of multitasking is that it's exhausting when you're doing 2 or 3 things simultaneously. You're using more energy than using the sum of energy required to do tasks independently. So you're also cheating yourself because you're not doing anything excellently, as Twyla Tharp, who's a dancer and choreographer, has said. I like to change it up, not just emergency managers, but folks from other fields. All right, so let me just stop there for a moment. Check in, questions. Okay. So what's a project budget? It's a planning tool for allocating and managing resources. We all have to manage to a certain budget. You got to basically plan budgets and so forth. It's a snapshot of resource usage. So it's similar to our project schedule. And it's an assessment of resource burn rate and forecast for future resource needs. Are we going to be, again, on budget, over budget, under budget, those sorts of things, because we all have to report to somebody on how we're using our resources. So how do we account for our resources? How do we actually plan for our budgets? Well, we identify those resources that are needs. so that's everything from, tools, supplies, people, our facilities, places, services, might include transportation and things of that sort. And we're going to assign those resources to those tasks. We're going to estimate the work durations for those resources, everything, all those elements I just mentioned, and the mix that goes in and how much time is going to be needed. We estimate those work durations, and we're going to develop our task costs. Okay, and that's just very formulaic, deterministic as to how we do that. And then as a whole, if we do that for each of the tasks and we add that up, we have our project budget. Okay, a part of this requires us creating, as I said, assignments, and one of the tools is what's called a responsibility assignment matrix, also called a RAM in short. And there's different ways of doing it. Essentially, we're assigning people to specific tasks. You could also do it by deliverable or phase, but if you want to get more granular, then you're going to do it by task. And it will incorporate all the team members, not just full-time, it might be part-time, it might be borrowed resources. The question often comes up to me, should we account for our internal resources, even if we're not accounting for costs? So let's say, for example, we have an accountant who is part of the team that does some of the financial accounting for the project. And my simple answer to that is yes, because if we're doing a true cost of this project, that is an opportunity cost if that person is working on this project and not working on something else. There's only so many hours during the day in which someone can actually allocate their time. So this example that I have here is just it's computing a task for one item for a work breakdown structure. So I'm taking the number there and the planning meeting. And, you see the task that's listed off to the left, task number, description, the duration in days. So 2 days, 2 full working days. And then you see the staff that are assigned. This is done by team, but you can certainly also do it by individual. And then I have over on the right side to left, sort of three major columns, is staff assigned. Those are the teams, and the cost per day for that. Or actually, the cost per day is multiplied by the 2 days. So just correction. Non-staff resources, so we included the laptop, printer, printing, and training and exercise room. So we're actually allocating those costs. And the total is given off right just to the left of the duration of days. That's the total of those 6 columns to the right. Just a very simple formula that can be used to, or a method to compute your costs. And that can be done for each task that you go through to compute them. When I do a project budget, I usually start with a rough order of magnitude, get an idea of what projects like that have cost in the past, and make some adjustments based upon what I understand of the project, what unique aspects of it, and then I go back and then I start that process of going through a detailed estimate. If I'm doing something for an exercise or plan or a new system, that sort of thing. Okay, we're close to where we need to be. And I'm gonna muscle through this as much as I can and hopefully come up within our time frame here. So beyond our scope, our schedule, and cost, there are other elements. And so all these elements, as I discussed before, should be integrated into our project plan, and they should be compared to one another, updated accordingly. So one of those is an HR plan where we describe how we're going to manage the team, vendors, any other, let's say, contracted resources that are part of that project. The quality requirements and the processes for how quality assurance processes, quality control. We're going to look at the risks associated with that project and how we're going to manage them, both the negative and the positive, those that are opportunities. We're looking at how we're going to procure our goods and services, staff, any borrowed resources outside of the immediate ones that are assigned to the project, and then the contracts that are associated with that. And then we're going to manage expectations and communications with the team and with the stakeholders who are part of that may not be part of the immediate team, to understand and manage their expectations over the period that we're managing that project, what the team can deliver on, and ensure that everyone is on the same page and that we course correct as needed. So I'm going to talk about quality and risk. quality management plans. Again, sort of natural to the work that we do in emergency management, and that also includes public health. Developing the quality plan and quality requirements. It's the first step, identifying what those quality requirements are, and we can do that using quality management tools. And then we develop our quality assurance and quality control procedures as part of those quality requirements and tools that we use. You'll see a diagram to the right there, just to illustrate that we're managing quality from a project management point of view and the processes that we use to manage the project. We also look at quality in terms of the development methods that will create the product or service. And then finally, we're looking at the quality of the outcome, the product or service that were created, or the combined outcome that might be both part product and service. So how do we define quality on projects in emergency management? We look at the design and function of that product. We'll look at the level of reliability that we expect from it, the durability, how it's going to function under different conditions, and then any service and maintenance requirements. And probably if I ask this question, I would assume that most of us have encountered various projects where we may not have considered service and maintenance requirements over periods of time. Okay, so what areas do we collect quality requirements from? There's a lot here. I'm not going to read every one of them. I don't want to bore you here, but the most common are after action reviews and improvement plans. We derive those there. What specific improvements and tasks are we taking on? What smart objectives have been created so that we're putting those improvements in place. For the client or customers, they might be from calls, it might be from meetings that we have with them, might be from public hearings, those sorts of things. Those are historical, looking at the past. If we look at the future, they might be interviews that we have with clients or customers. What can we do to improve or enhance this? It might be an observation of the process and procedures at the time that we're actually doing it. It may not be as part of a formal AAR hot wash, so to speak. It might be looking at benchmarking capabilities against similar agencies that are in other parts of the country or other organizations that are around the block. How do they do business? How can we improve on how we do continuity of operations, those sorts of things? And it might be looking at data analytics, looking at all the information we pull from. All right, what is quality assurance? Well, quality assurance is really targeted at the product development and delivery process. So it's baked into how do we create those things? Whereas quality control looks at the targeted product or the end process. If we're looking at a finished pencil, I know it doesn't show up on the screen here because of the green screen, but if we're looking at it, this is the end product, we're inspecting that for its functional performance to make sure it meets what we're requiring. Okay. I'm gonna skip over this because you'll have this here, but basically this is just a methodology for creating the quality assurance and quality control procedures that would go into what you're creating. This is a list of some common quality management tools. So brainstorming with clients and customers and end users on what's required, interviews with subject matter experts, surveys, conducting focus groups, prototyping and product demonstrations. I'm a big believer in that. Process mapping. What's this process look like if we're, let's say rolling out a pod, or if we're, doing public messaging? What's that process look like from beginning to end? Fishbone or Ishikawa diagram. This is a root cause analysis, or what we call the Six Sigma DMAIC process, defining the problem, measuring it, analyzing it, improving it, and controlling it. Okay. This is an example of a root cause analysis, often called the fishbone diagram, for identifying quality issues with a commodity distribution point. This comes right from the book. People, methods, materials, supplies, machines, and measurements. Some quality management tools. Some of them you'll notice same as what we had in terms of defining the quality at the beginning. So we'll do a check here looking at some of these methods here. So quality versus risk. There are two sides of the same coin in many ways. If we look at, it's interesting, if you look at the ASPR requirements, and Michael, you may know this, for the Strategic National Stockpile, the quality, in terms of the quality approach, they look at it as on a risk basis. So, it's sort of a natural fit. So if we fail to define our requirements adequately, those can result in system failures or suboptimal performance. On the flip side of it, if risk does not include stakeholders define requirements, it can result in a lower quality solution. So these are, just to give you some examples there. So what's a project risk? It's I've often hear, well, we're concerned about, team morale. It's a concern, yes, and it's a factor, but the actual risk is an event which can impact the project goal and objectives or deliverables. The result of bad morale might be that people either are absent for significant periods of time, less perform at a level which is suboptimal or less effective for the work that they're doing. Those are the results. That's the event. Now, maybe many different events that take place, but the factors are, some of those things, and those might be difficult to measure. Whereas an event, we can take a look at the historical events that have taken place for given projects. The factors can contribute to a risk event, and the impact and consequences are the result from a risk event. Now, there might be what we call tertiary consequences. So there might be second and third order consequences from a primary risk event. So the one is, if we're looking at a tornado, you have high speed. High speeds can result in, let's say, cars swerving off the road. The car swerving off the road could cause an accident. And you get the picture, those chain of consequences, so to speak. One of the methods I like to use is what's called a bow tie analysis. You have the risk event in the center there. You have causes or factors that can contribute to it. On the other side, you have the consequences or what the impacts are. And in between, you have prevention capabilities. They might be looked at as mitigation measures or prevention capabilities. And then on the other side of the risk event, you have mitigation. Those things can reduce the impact once it's happened. And those might be response capabilities as well. So those are what we would call risk treatment or controls on either side of the risk event before the factors take place and before the consequences are realized. A risk management plan, we develop our risk plan and a risk register. Those are sort of the basic parts of it. There's more details to it, but that's it. We identify risks and we prioritize them. And that includes following that sort of an assessment and analysis of risks, coming up with what are the most important risks, and we develop our risk management process and reporting. What you have as a diagram there is a type of, you might be familiar with Porter's model, defined forces. That's somewhat similar to it. This one incorporates social, technological, economic, ecological, political, legal, and ethical aspects, all within sort of our current VUCA environment, our volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situation that we're dealing with, depending upon where you are and what's going on. And then within that, the impacts on the organization, on the project, and on the project output or product or service. That's looking at it from a broad level. You have a classical risk management process, identifying risk events, assessing them, analyzing them, treating them, and then managing those risks. And this is a continuous cycle. And the tools, methods and tools are given there. Some of these are specific to risks. They can also be used in terms of quality as well. So they're not exclusive to that. As you see the fishbone diagram and value process model diagram. Those are used in both spheres. Some risk management strategies, these are both negative and positive risks. We look at acceptance and escalation. For negative risks, you can look at avoiding the risk entirely, not taking out a project or not pursuing an option. You can look at prevention and mitigation or transferring the risk. And transferring the risk, most always it's either purchasing insurance or outsourcing a specific product or service outside of the organization. Positive risks, we look at exploiting, taking advantage of it, enhancing the risk, looking at areas where we can increase the probability or the outcome as a result of it, or sharing it between our organization and others. This is just an example of a project delay and what some of the causal factors are. Mitigation measures risk response measures once it's happened, and directs consequences. So again, you can provide these slides. You can take a look at that. Human resource plan. It's basically assembling and developing the team, developing the org chart and responsibility assignment matrix. But then it's also managing the team. So it's the team administration, rules of engagement, status meetings, and reporting. But it's also more than that, right? It's helping to develop the team. So it's that development process. Most teams go through that forming, storming, norming, and performing process by Bruce Tuckman. Creating high performance teams. These are some of the basic aspects. Creating a strong sense of purpose with mutual accountability towards a common purpose. Ambitious and performance goals compared to the average teams in general. Effective plans and operational procedures with a common understanding around plans and procedures. Individual obligations to their specific roles. And complementary skill sets and interchangeable skills. So this is from Katzenbach and Smith, their work for the article that came out in Harvard Business Review in 2015, The Wisdom of Teams. And this is an update actually from a case that I read from Katzenbach when I was in graduate school. God knows how long ago. Procurement is a necessary evil for all of us to deal with. There's different types of contracts and contract vehicles, vendor management and contract requirements. Again, I'll share this with you. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move through this because, again, I can read through this or we can go through this at another time. I want to do something real quick here, and this is a little bit of a leadership exercise. So now that you've been listening to me for about an hour or almost an hour or so at this point, I'd like you to just follow these. And Dan, I want you to follow along. Anyone who can show their camera, please do so. I'm going to give you some simple, we're going to follow some simple, it's a simple exercise, some simple steps. Okay, so I'm going to count to 3 and I'm going to ask you to clap. Okay, it's very simple. Okay, and I want you to take yourself not only off camera, but I want you to unmute your audio, if you would. And so, Dan, are you still there? Can you put your camera on and unmute yourself? Okay, so on the count of 3, okay, I want you to clap. Okay, are you ready? Everyone ready? Okay. So ready? 1, 2. Okay. I see Art's looking a little puzzled. Okay, now just follow me again, except this time. Okay, all right, hold on a second. I'm going to do it again. Okay. Okay. Again, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Okay, I think Art and Tom are getting it down now. Okay, I'm going to do it a 3rd time again. I want you to follow along very carefully. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, all right. So there were some differences in the instructions that I provided, clearly. Okay, the first time, to be fair, I counted 1, 2, and then I clapped. I did not say 3. And in the second instance, I counted to 3 and I did not clap. And then the 3rd time, of course, I did both. Now, what's this tell us about leadership? Yeah, Michael?
Have a different perspective on what the direction you have received from someone.
Yeah.
So someone can perceive it differently than someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody might, like when you didn't say 3 the first time, some people may anticipate you're going to say 3 and try and get ahead of what you're about to do, and then others may wait. And then obviously the other ways are other scenarios.
Tom, what happened for you? You take yourself off mute.
Yeah, I guess the kind of the joke of do we go on three, or is it 1, 2, clap? Or, so I kind of saw that, as you did the clap, and as Art was there waiting, your hands at the ready. So, I guess, as you did give us the instructions. I think when you did it the second time, I think you're giving us some guidance. You're looking to see if people are going to follow along with the instructions rather than you have to, act it out too.
Yeah. Art, what were your thoughts? You were, I think, smiling a little frustrated there.
No, you said 1, 2, and nobody said 3, so I didn't clap. It's it's follow the leader kind of thing.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And so this is all good points. And that is, people, when it comes to leadership, people look at what the leader does. They look at what the leaders say. And when there's a disconnect, that's when people hesitate. That's when there's ambiguity. People are not sure. When the two are aligned, that's when leadership can be most effective. Okay. I'd like you think about how you define leadership. Okay. It's been said, we know what leadership is not. Leadership is not abdicating responsibility, but leadership is where we take responsibility, but we also influence others to take on things and to do things that they may not have been able to do before, and to guide others to collaborate towards that goal. That's sort of a catch-all for everything. So here are some leadership qualities, right? And some of these, for those of you who studied leadership, there's some great books on leadership. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do cite them in my book. It's inspiration and drive, it's communication, consensus and conflict management, critical thinking, decision making, delegation, developing others, managing finances, critical, because if everything else is great, but if you don't do the finances well, then you run over budget and time, which I know we're at the end of time here, so I'm conscious of that. Respect and concern for others. So it's being conscious of, there's folks who are pointed to as great leaders like Steve Jobs and others. Unfortunately, they also left a lot of damage along the way, and to me, that's not a great thing. Self-management, self-managing yourself and your time, team building, forming teams, fostering cohesion, achieving objectives, and then most importantly, time management. So I know we're at our end here. We're beyond a minute here, so I appreciate the additional time. Just a final thought, and you may have heard this one before. A ship is in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. And that's same is true for projects. Projects are not safe if they're not executed, or if they have too many, buffers and everything around them, protective measures. But we need to take conscious and calculated risks in order for them to come to fruition. And so, last point here, you have access to my email, and Dan's probably looking at this email and saying, "Wait a minute, why didn't you give me this email? Because you gave me a long email before." This is a simpler email just for you to contact me regarding the book or the workshop. It's andrew@pm4em.com. The book that Dan had mentioned, I mentioned a few times, called Riding the Wave, Applying Project Management Science in the Field of Emergency Management, is available on pre-sale officially on Friday. And there's a discount code that's available to you. So if you click on the URL, or you actually type in that URL, and then eFly01, that's the discount code. You can use that, and that's through the publisher. Podcast I have on the topic of project management for emergency management is widely available on many different platforms. What happened here? Oops, hold on. From current slide. Okay. What happened there? Okay, there we go. Whoops. What happened? Oops. Okay, hold on a second here. I'll skip to the end. Why it's Whoops, I think I have the wrong presentation again. Hold on just a second. I will. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Did it again. Did it again. Anyway, Dan, you can send out the links that I wanted to show there. But I wanted to mention that the workshop that I have that's extended on project management for emergency management is it's going to be rolling out April 6th. It'll be every Saturday from 11 to 2 o'clock. No, I'm sorry, from 10 to 1 o'clock Eastern time. And would love to have you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or if you have any questions regarding the workshop, happy to take them afterwards. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
Andrew, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, I have a question for you. So I'm taking a project management class through Oklahoma State University. And there right now, the last module's been more about methodologies within project management, waterfall, agile, or hybrid. What do you see the most? It's a project management class for everything, so it doesn't really pertain to emergency management directly, but I'm trying to figure out, like, what methodology do you see more common in emergency management, like project management stuff now? It seemed like waterfall at the beginning when we were talking about them, but now I've kind of looked at it, I think more like a hybrid model, but I was wanting to see what you thought on the methodologies within project management. What's more likely in the EM field?
Well, it's either a mix of either an attempt at agile or agile and standard project management. I see a lot of the tools that are managed that people use that are more agile based. So like things like Trello or Miro, or they're products from Atlassian. There's a few others that are like that. The thing is that when it comes down to it, so that's a basic answer. Standard is usually the predominant that's out there, but the methodology needs to fit the type of project. So not every project lends itself to either agile or standard. If it's a more deterministic, in other words, it's a clear outcome that they're looking to achieve, then that's clearly standard project management. If it's if the requirements are looser and not clear, then agile might be appropriate. I will say one thing though: if requirements are fully defined, it doesn't matter what kind of project management methodology. That if you're not sure where you're going, then you're on on a journey of a never-ending story. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in my book on chapter 15, where I talk about project management as a project, just in other words, emergency management as a project. Sorry, got that backwards. I talk a little bit about different methodologies and where they're most appropriate, and just in terms of emergency management, just in terms of managing emergency responses themselves. Now, I do state a number of times in the book that the methodology needs to fit the type of project that it's supposed to meet the needs of. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that question. Does anybody else have any other questions? And I really appreciate. I know we're over time here, but I'll set aside 5 minutes so that we can talk about things. Dan?
Yeah, so everybody, I put the link for where the recordings will be, because this is so as you know, this was recorded, and then some of the videos that Andrew referred to will be there as well for you to be able to look at and take part in those and actually see things a little bit deeper. I will be putting links for the 18-hour course that he's doing that starts in April and goes over 6 weeks, and then some other courses as well. There's a lot of information here. So if you go to that link and you actually sign up, create your login credentials, you'll be able to access all these recordings on the back end and watch them as many times as you want to. Thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to come in and do this workshop. I know that there's a lot of people that show interest. Ultimately, the part that is not beneficial is that there's the time allocation, people being able to be here. There's people saying that they would love to come, they just don't have the time allocation. So being able to record this and share that on the back end is very appreciated for those who would like to take part, but weren't able to take part in the actual workshop. So thank you for that. And then I look forward to helping and getting the word out on your course and your book. So congratulations on that. With the pre-sale starting on Friday, I look forward to getting that and having you sign it. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I apologize for arriving a little bit late or starting a little bit late today, but I think we got a lot done. Thank you very much, Mark, for this session. And good to see some folks that I had seen before, and nice to work with with you all who are new to this. And please feel free to reach out to me. I did post in the chat the link to the website. You could find information on the book and also about the workshop. So if you go there, it's the first page is on the book, but then there's a link to the workshop. And Dan's also sent you information. So I wish everyone a great day ahead and a great week. And Dan, did you want to talk afterwards just to sort of debrief?
Let's catch up. Actually,